I also think it's worth saying that, when I did graduate from law school, I had this notion that you start at a law firm and you grind and grind for 8, 9, 10 years, and then you become a partner. Once you become a partner, it's this magical title where you spend 4 days a week at a golf course schmoozing with clients, and then you come into the office once in a while and oversee some associates. And that was a rude awakening because the practice of law in a large law firm is a business. And the folks who are, who've done well in their career and continue to do so, are businessmen as well as attorneys, and they work hard.
Welcome to another episode of the Power Forward Pod, hosted by the Power Forward Group Financial Advisory Team. I'm Reuben Levavi, founder of Power Forward Group, and today I'm joined and co-hosted by Chris DeVito from our Lawfin team. Today's guest is Reuben Levavi. You'll notice the names are pretty closely aligned. Reuben's of Counsel at Winston Taylor. In this episode, Reuben will talk about his unconventional journey, starting with his time in law school, surviving the 2008 market crash, and all the different stages of his career up until now. He also highlights the importance of remembering that although the practice of law is a moral profession, when it comes to big law, it is also a business. Very excited to have him here today. Welcome to the podcast, Reuben.
Pleasure to be here. I'm talking to you from beautiful Glen Rock, New Jersey, where I'm working from home today, while my younger child recovers from a stomach bug.
Okay, so it sounds like a wonderful day to be working from home. You're doing home care duty plus big law duty, right?
Yeah. I'm double teaming with my wife as I work through some projects and try to relieve her when I can if Julia needs some time with Dada.
Okay, lovely. So we almost like to think about like everything we do almost in reverse. It's kind of like legal writing. We start with the conclusion and work our way backwards. But I really want to hear and share with the audience a little bit about your career path, some choices you've made along the way, some things that just happened to us as we progress through our careers, and just share a little bit about your experience. So right now, you've been at Winston Strawn for how long?
Almost 2 years. I work in the structured finance group, which is largely residential mortgage-backed securities at Winston & Strawn.
Okay, so MBS, right? Mortgage-backed securities.
Mortgage-backed securities, that's right.
Does that loop you around to the beginning of your career, or take us through the progression? Tell us where you've been, how it's been.
Sure. So I graduated from NYU Law School in 2008. And at the time I thought, I had the world at my fingertips. I got a job at a law school at a wonderful large law firm called Dewey and LeBoeuf.
Where are they today?
I'm sorry?
Where are they today?
Funny you should ask. Dewey and LeBoeuf, when I was a summer associate, was called Dewey Ballantine. After I summered in my 3L year, they merged with another firm called LeBoeuf, Lamb and Green. This was an inopportune time for two large firms to merge because short after I started at the newly combined firm, the 2008 market collapse occurred, largely, as you know, because of the type of work I do now, or rather because lenders would make bad loans to mortgagors knowing that they could offload the risk. You can watch The Big Short and learn more about it. The industry has since reformed itself a lot, and that's a lot of what I do now is helping clients navigate the reforms to make sure they are on the right side of the laws and regulations meant to prevent 2008 again. But I started my career as an M&A attorney at Dewey and LeBoeuf, and shortly after I started, credit dried up. There effectively was no M&A happening. Walking through a law firm like mine at that time was like walking through a ghost town. People didn't want to make eye contact. The halls were empty. There wasn't much work to go around, and I was a newly minted attorney, right? So I didn't have the skill set to really justify saying, "Hey, give me more work," when there was so little work to go around. Try as I might, there just wasn't enough. So Dewey and LeBoeuf instituted, a project where they basically told any associates who really wanted to, listen, there's no work here. Why don't you go find some other opportunity for 18 months? go do public interest work, start your own business, ski the Alps, whatever you want. And then in 18 months, the world will be all fixed and you can come back.
Wait, before we fast forward to what happened 18 months later, let's
Mm-hmm.
let's almost rewind a step for a minute.
Sure.
So you go to law school.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know why when you go to law school, you go to NYU? Do you know what that means and what you want to come out doing? Like, do you know what the practice of law even means going to law school? Like, what that's going to mean for you on a go forward basis?
Well, the reason I went to law school, I was a journalism major, and I took a class about journalism and the law, and it was effectively a First Amendment class with an attorney who was general counsel for the New York Times. And I just thought it was the coolest job in the world. And I said, I'm going to be a First Amendment lawyer.
Okay.
Little did I know there's 5 First Amendment lawyers in the country. It's not really a burgeoning area of law. But my interest in media really led me to an interest in law. Law school didn't really help solidify that one way or the other. While you could do some focusing on specific areas, you're mostly learning how to think, right? You learn the basics of contracts and constitutional law and civil procedure, but at the end of the day, you're really learning how to read case law, learning how to read regulations and statutes, and learning how to work your way through them, and how to deal with clients who are also working their way through these. So by the time I graduated law school, I sort of knew I wasn't going to be a First Amendment attorney, but I also knew, quote unquote, knew that I would have a stable, lucrative career. You just like any job, you come out of school and you don't really know anything about the actual substantive work. You learn that starting on day one when you step foot in the office.
Right, Chris. What was your major? What was your major in undergrad? And like when you chose that, was the idea of like saying, all right, I know what my career is going to look like, or was it just what subject is going to get me through undergrad?
I definitely picked the wrong one to get me through undergrad because I picked engineering. That was the hardest one to get through undergrad. I think kind of like Reuben, like I went into that because my grandfather was an engineer, and they're like, "Oh, you're good at math, go do that." And I had a different experience than you, Reuben. I hated it. Like there was no teacher that kept me in it. In fact, I think my first year, like Monday mornings, my first class was I think 7 or 8 a.m. and the last class ended at like 9 p.m. It was like a 3-hour lab. I was like, yeah, I don't know if this is gonna work out for me long term. So I didn't stick with that, but I also didn't choose that. That was kind of like pushed on me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I took all my AP classes in high school and basically never took a hard science class in all of college.
Yeah, I remember having one elective class. It was the professor's name was Uffer. It was like it was physics 1 or physics 2, whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
And they used to call it Suffer with Uffer, like the way it was graded. Like top of the class was like C minus was like you were number 1 in the class. The first day sitting down in class, he gets up, he says, "Listen," he gave the whole background of class. Like, if you've chosen this as your elective, you should probably leave if you don't need this class. And like 5 people just got up and left. Like they weren't even in the engineering school. Like, all right, yeah, we're out of here. Like this is crazy. But yeah, so that's what I was dealing with. So much so that they would grade you'd get a bump up on the grading system, like even for like your 4.0 average, like that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like whatever you got would get like times 1.25 in the engineering school. That's how ridiculously overly complicated it was.
One thing I'll say about law school for anyone who's thinking about going but hasn't taken the plunge is that I loved law school, which a lot of people don't. But my experience in college was that, you're in large lecture halls with professors who really want to spend time publishing and going to little, wine and cheese parties, and sort of resent the fact that they have to sit there and teach a bunch of, 20-year-old brats. When I got to law school, I did feel as though the professors wanted to be there teaching you. Like they felt proud of growing the next generation of attorneys. They really do see the practice of law as a loftier goal than just making money.
Were any of them like working at the time too, like as practicing attorneys while they were teaching?
Sure. So there are adjunct professors.
Yeah.
There are folks who've practiced law and continue to do so, but also want to get in on teaching students. oftentimes in a specific area. So as you go through law school in the first year, you're largely taking your general classes, criminal law, torts, constitutional law. In your second and third year, you could take classes that are a little more geared toward a specific area of practice. And oftentimes you'll have adjunct professors who are experts in that area who come in and teach courses.
Yeah.
So for example, my work focuses heavily on securities regulation. My securities regulation professor was an adjunct professor who I think worked at Mayor Brown while he was teaching.
Yeah, it's funny you say that in terms of that the professors really love the law and that was passed through. We use the line oftentimes when we do financial planning for our clients. On the younger side, we ask them to think about the oldest attorney they know at the firm, and the picture is this older gentleman with elbow patches on their tweed jacket, kind of that old version of events. And when we see them working at the firm in their mid 60s to later 60s, early 70s, a lot of times what we find is if they really love the law, they'd be working at a law school, to your point. But the practice of the law is a little bit of a grind and can be a grind for some. Others do love it for sure. But oftentimes I speculate that, life has just happened. They haven't taken the time to plan and think about what their exit strategy is. And they just keep going because they need that income stream to come in. And that sometimes is what I think about, big law in general. There's this event of for a lot of people, it just kind of comes and happens and you can progress through the field. And there's this concept of golden handcuffs, right? We have these golden handcuffs. I got to keep growing. I got to keep making more money because my expenses are getting higher. But it's just enough to keep me there working really hard. Have you found that at all, that there's a little bit of a golden handcuff treadmill relationship to a big law career?
Sure. It's a lucrative career. Starting right off the bat, folks out of law school are making upwards of $200,000. And it's difficult to leave that. As you probably know, your expenses rise to meet your income, not the other way around, right? So once you're making a certain salary, it's hard to take a pay cut if you've geared your life toward making that salary. There are tons of people who do leave the practice, and I think it's important to recognize the sacrifices both of being a big law attorney and of not being a big law attorney if you've started there. They are real. Money is not everything in life, but it's not nothing. I also think it's worth saying that, when I did graduate from law school, I had this notion that you start at a law firm and you grind and grind for 8, 9, 10 years, and then you become a partner. Once you become a partner, it's this magical title where you spend 4 days a week at a golf course schmoozing with clients, and then you come into the office once in a while and oversee some associates. That was a rude awakening because the practice of law in a large law firm is a business, and the folks who are, who've done well in their career and continue to do so are businessmen as well as attorneys, and they work hard, sometimes harder than the associates. Maybe not the same hours, but their skills are put to use on a daily basis, and they're on the ground working on the deals and managing the clients, not always on a golf course.
Right. How's your golf game?
I've never played golf in my life.
Well, maybe that's a problem.
It could be. It might be something to pick up.
Yeah, Chris, no golf for you? Golf for you?
No golf. No golf. My back doesn't hurt that bad yet. Start golf.
All right. Yeah, that's a retirement sport, I think, for some of us, but for others.
And I think it's worth thinking about that conflict between what I said earlier about appreciating professors in law school who see this as a lofty goal, practicing law as a virtue in and of itself, versus the practice of law primarily to make money. And you can keep both of those things in your mind at the same time. You can be proud of practicing in one of the traditional professions, and helping people and doing pro bono work, but really feeling like the rule of law is important, and having an understanding regulations is important as a social good, while also understanding that ultimately big law is a business.
Yeah, it's very hard as a young law student or a young associate coming out. I remember my experience in law school is I went because I was good at test taking. I took the LSAT and I said, all right,
Mhm.
let's do this. I loved
Yep.
undergrad. I inverted from you on the opposite end. I love the flexibility of choosing my courses in undergrad. And then when you hit, law school and they are
Mm.
chosen for you. And I said, hey, this is pretty inflexible. But I mean, for us, the numbers have changed. I remember, the goal was, all right, if you get a job in big law, which I didn't know about till my first year of law school, that's 162. 162 year one was a big dollar amount. That's like, oh, I haven't
Yep.
thought about what the practice of law is, but to me, all of a sudden, the practice of law was big law. And I didn't even know that coming in. To your point a moment ago, you have to keep your eye on the prize where it's really got to be about what you want out of your career. So thinking about where you are, more than a decade out of law school, when you think about and you look back and look where you are today, what do you enjoy about the practice? What do you get out of it on a personal level?
It's almost 2 decades. Um, well, you mentioned being good at test taking, as was I, and I actually loved taking the LSAT. It was solving puzzles. It was using logic, and seeing all these pieces and putting them together. And that's largely how I see what I do on a day-to-day basis. You're confronted with the problem, or more likely, you actually have to identify the problem first, and then you have to solve it. Sometimes you know where the pieces are to the puzzle. Sometimes you don't. You have to identify a problem, locate the pieces, put them back together. And I see the day-to-day practice as an exercise in using logic and common sense and substantive knowledge to solve issues, to solve problems, puzzles. It's also an area where you're dealing with human beings, at least for the time being. Um, and I enjoy that aspect. I enjoy working with my colleagues. I enjoy working with folks senior to me, folks junior to me. And oftentimes, but not always, I enjoy working with the clients. They come from a different perspective. They
Yeah.
have needs that you need to anticipate. They're also human beings who like to chat and play golf occasionally. And I find that gratifying. I've also made connections with folks in different, who aren't necessarily clients, but I work across from other law firms all the time. Those are some of the best relationships I've made, actually. Are just folks who I've worked across from day in and day out. Because I'm a transactional attorney and not a litigator, my work is oftentimes collaborative. No, you could have two clients who have my client will have different interests than your client, but at the end of the day, we're working on a deal and everyone wants to get it done.
Right.
As opposed to being in a litigation where, in some ways, it might be a zero-sum game. Our goal is to increase the pie. So working collaboratively, even though there is tension, things occasionally get a bit heated. For most of the time, it's collaborative, and when you're working across from folks, you're all trying to get to the same basic goal while keeping in mind your client's specific needs and protecting them.
Right. Yeah.
You've been at a couple of different firms too, I think, right, Reuben? I think you did an in-house stint a while ago too, if I remember right?
Yeah, I have.
For a little bit.
Well, if you want to go back to Dewey and LeBoeuf in 2008 and the 18-month vacation, for me that turned into about a 3-year vacation, because Dewey and LeBoeuf, after 18 months, came back and said, well, the economy really hasn't got better, and we don't really have work. We didn't 18 months ago, and we don't now. And in the interim, I had some family issues I had to take care of. So I didn't really grow my legal skills in the ways that I would have wanted to. So when those 18 months were out, they called it a furlough. They really didn't have space for myself or any of the other folks who took the furlough. I was disappointed and a little upset with them. And I said, okay, well, there's still no M&A happening, but I had some other legal interests. And I said, I'm mildly interested in tax law. And they said, yeah, there's space in the tax group, but you don't have any substantive knowledge, and you'd need an advanced degree in tax law called an LLM. And I said, well, I don't have one of those, but maybe I can go back to school. And they said that would work. And I said, would you pay for it? And they kind of said, okay. So I negotiated.
They didn't want to pay a salary, but they paid for you to go back to school at the time.
No, they paid
Yeah.
salary too. Didn't
Oh, they were paying
did
salary
pay
too.
Or not?
They were paying me a percentage of my salary while I was on furlough. Yeah.
That's cool. Okay.
And
That's
they were
what I
paying
did
off
for
my student loans.
the existing loans already, you mean? Like, and then
Yes,
more
loans.
school on top of it.
They were paying back the loans I had already incurred to go to law school.
Okay. I can see why you took 3 years instead of 18 months then. Yeah, that's
It was not by choice, I assure you. I really did want to get my career kickstarted. But I did go back and I took the tax LLM, which is a 1 year intensive course of study. And knowing that I had a job waiting for me at the end, I did an interview while I was there. And Dewey and LeBoeuf ended up going bankrupt about a month before I graduated. To this day, it's the largest law firm bankruptcy in history. So I graduated with the tax LLM, still no substantive legal skills and no job opportunities. This was 2012 at this point. I'm out of law school, 3.5 years, and there's still really no work. So it was a bit of a struggle. I ended up joining a very small practice down on Wall Street, where we represented broker-dealers in the foreign currency exchange industry. These are folks who trade on dollar euro, dollar franc. And that was really just, I needed a job. I wanted to, really start to work. And it was not big law by any means. It was, I think, a 4 or 5 person shop. But the work was sophisticated. And I was there about 16 months before I did find another big law opportunity. And this was, at this point, 2014. So I'm 6 years out of law school.
The first one you were at?
It was. Yes. I was 6 years out of law school when I found an opportunity in capital markets, specifically commercial mortgage-backed securities, which I knew nothing about. But they were willing to take a chance on me. I went there, interviewed, got the offer, and took it on the spot. So I started at Cadwallader in 2014 as a first-year associate.
What was the biggest difference? People ask us all the time about going in-house, just being in-house. What did you feel was the biggest difference on the day-to-day between being in big law versus an in-house
Sure.
place?
So just to clarify, after Cadwallader, I went to one other law firm, and then I went in-house for a while. The biggest difference is that when you're the only attorney, as opposed to working at a place where everyone's an attorney, you're going to get asked questions and you're going to be expected to know answers off the top of your head. And in a way, your opinion, or at least my experience, was that my opinion was well respected by the business folks. They, oftentimes they thought of a law degree as some magical, cape that confers on you a wisdom that they don't have. And there is some experience and some substantive knowledge that went into my counsel, but oftentimes it was also just using common sense, being willing to put in the time to read something that they didn't want to, being willing to negotiate and deal with attorneys on the other side. As opposed to when you're in a law firm, you're with a bunch of experts in the specific area that you're in. So you might have an idea and someone else might have a better idea. Your idea is not always the law. So you're dealing with other attorneys versus business people. People say there's a conflict between the in-house attorneys and the business folks at a company, because sometimes you're the one who has to tell them to slow down, or you don't want to tell them no.
You almost become sometimes like a compliance person. You almost become like a compliance person in the background, right? Feeling perspective.
I didn't think it was compliance, but you want to protect your client, make sure that that their interests are protected at all times. Also that they're doing things legally. Now, like I said, my job is to solve puzzles. It's not to say no, it's to find out how to say yes. But even so, oftentimes the business folks will want to do things a very specific way. And when you create roadblocks, that can create some friction. That wasn't my experience very often when I was in-house. I thought that the business folks and the legal folks worked together phenomenally while I was there. So, I didn't have much of a problem there. But I do have stories from folks at other companies who've expressed that issue.
Did you find, from a work-life balance perspective, that you were able to have a little bit more balance and a little bit more life by going in-house? Because we get that question a lot, right? There's an idea of burnout in big law. Maybe I'll go in-house. Did you find that it was really, or did you find that it was very similar in that sense?
I did. I had a lot more flexibility going in-house. But one thing I think is worth stressing is that law firms talk about culture. They talk, any company today talks about culture. And to some degree, law firms, like any business, differentiate themselves in various ways. But at the end of the day, big law is big law. Any firm that tells you we are different in so many ways, around the margins, maybe. But at the end of the day, like I said, it's the practice of law as a business. It's client service. And if you've been to one law firm and you go to another law firm, for the most part, you might know what you're getting. Versus going in-house, which is an amorphous term for working for a company that's not a law firm, is far more differentiated. So whereas I did have a lot more flexibility when I went in-house, I, again, know a lot of attorneys who've gone to companies and found the exact opposite, that they're working as hard, as long hours as they were in a law firm and getting paid half as much. So it's certainly something to consider if you want to leave the practice of law at a big law firm. But you should really do the diligence and know what you're getting before you take that plunge.
So then you transitioned back, you came back to big law. And when I think about your career kind of in all the steps, it's almost like you're a little bit of a survivor from the time you came out in terms of where the market was and where big law was then and where it is today. Find that like your class, 2008, is almost like a forgotten class. Like there's very few of you left, or do you find that, you progress in your career and you're seeing a lot of your classmates throughout?
I don't think my class is a forgotten class. I still keep in touch with a lot of people I went to law school with, and just like any other attorneys, some of them have been successful, some of them have left practice and been successful in other areas. Some of them are partners, some of them are counsel like myself. Others, started businesses in tech. But I think what you're getting at is that when you graduate into a rough job market, that does follow you through your career. And I think the market kind of works in cycles. And, depending on where you are in that cycle will have a big impact on where you end up and how the struggles that you face. Everyone is going to face struggles in their career. They're not going to be the same for everyone. So my struggles were in large part defined by when I graduated from law school, the law firm I started practice at, which was a well-regarded major law firm, but just happened to be one of the few firms that really went under because they had just gone through that merger. So any career, like I said, is going to be a combination of choices you make and luck. And the choices I made and luck took me to where I am today.
I think it's amazing that you shared with us. You've almost seen it all, right? You've seen a law firm go under, you've been in-house, you've been back in big law. Now looking forward kind of over the next, decade, we talk about AI, we talk about change. Like where do you see big law going on a decade forward basis? Like where do you see the industry going?
Sure. Well, I should preface this by saying I'm not an expert on the legal industry, but it is going to have to adapt to AI. Firms are crawling all over themselves to do so. I have incorporated it into my practice. And you have to be careful not to divulge any, private client information. You have to make sure you're working within the confines of what your firm and the client allow. Each client can opt out of you using AI. Some firms are developing in-house technologies. One thing I've always been interested in is law firms that try to create business outside of just the revenues they get from clients. So there are law firms now developing their own in-house systems, which they can go out and license if they want to. Yeah. I do see that happening. I think another thing that I see is, generational changes. I'm sure that when I started practicing, I got issued a BlackBerry. That was the height of technology at the time. And I saw partners who were bemoaning the fact that they had to have a computer. So I was technologically advanced relative to them. At this point, I'm a dinosaur. And you've got the younger crop who can use AI like it's second nature because they've grown up with it. At the same time, what your 20-somethings expect now in terms of work-life balance and in terms of the way they're treated is very different than what I expected at the time I was starting off my career. And there's always a conflict between the dinosaurs like me saying, hey, this is the job, hop to, versus recognizing that they are the future. It's going to be their industry, not mine. Right. So, to some degree, some of the ideas that the newer generations have are great, and that they demand a certain amount of respect. And in some ways, I think that it is kind of hard to keep their attention. So it's a combination of trying to grow that class, to make sure that they can get the best of what the older generation has, but also recognizing that they are the future and not me and not the big rainmakers. And hopefully they can bring some great changes to the industry.
Right. Chris, any final questions?
Yeah, I mean, have you ever kind of stepped back and realized you've come full circle from mortgage-backed securities? They once were the reason why you weren't working, and now you're working on them. Like, has that ever dawned on you?
It's dawned on me all the time. And like I said, one of the things you have to do in big law is keep two thoughts in your head at the same time, right? And on the one hand, the abuse of the mortgage-backed security system was one of the driving factors of the 2008 crisis. On the other hand, you could consider what would happen if the capital markets broke down, if your mortgage originators, or even your auto loan, student loan, solar loan, personal loan, credit card originators were not able to offset some of that risk, they wouldn't make you that loan. Liquidity in the market would dry up. You would actually, the entire basis of our country's economic system depends on these lenders being willing to do that, to extend credit, and effectively they will not do that unless they can offload some of that risk. Meanwhile, there are investors who want exposure to the U.S. housing market. This product is selling not because anyone's twisting, arms to get them to buy. Demand is very high, and actually, if you look at, in my industry right now, spreads are very, very tight. Despite all the conflicts going on in the world and uncertainty, people still want this product. People still have faith in the U.S. housing market. So, yes, there's an element of, people thinking this is somehow a bad or evil industry. But the regulations that have been put in place are largely geared toward ending some of the predatory behavior that might have occurred prior to 2008, making sure that lenders are required to have some skin in the game, that while they can sell bonds backed by loans, they have to keep some themselves, making sure that they tighten underwriting standards. So they're not, making loans to people, ninjas, no income, no job, no assets. So yes, it's not lost on me that the industry, largely responsible for the 2008 financial crisis and the challenges I faced earlier in my career, are effectively where I've made my career. But I've made my peace with that, and I actually find it to be an interesting and fulfilling career insofar as I meet great people and I solve problems.
Hey, it's turning lemons into lemonade. Right?
That's it. I think that one thing I've had to learn in my career is the serenity prayer, right? Accept the things you can't change the things you can, and have the wisdom to know the difference. It's really, put things in context for me and allowed me to grow my career into something I have a little more control over than I did when I first started.
I think that's an amazing lesson. I think for not just big law attorneys, but for everybody, for all of us. As we close up, I'd love to share some, if you're open to it, some Levavi inside family baseball. You've been clear with us that it's clear from listening to you today that you're definitely the smartest Levavi. We'll talk about that afterwards. But and I may have slipped up once or twice, but what I love about you is that you take yourself seriously, you provide a lot of knowledge, but at the same time, you have a sense of humor. Can we share what we really call you? Because I probably slipped up twice or three times during this podcast. What do we as a family call you?
Yeah, so outside of my practice, outside of office hours, I don't go by Reuben. I've never liked that name. I go by Fudge. Your name and my name are similar, but actually you were named Reuben before I was named Reuben, because I came out and my parents decided I was going to be Fudge. And when I was a couple years old, they explained to me that that name is kind of ridiculous, and no one is going to take me seriously in the practice of big law going by Fudge. I do occasionally see folks who've gotten by and are very progressed in their career who go by nicknames. And I'm always curious and jealous, but I've come to terms with using the name Reuben at work.
My daughter's in second grade, and she's in the middle of reading Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing, and now Fudge-mania she's up to, and she's really excited. So we love Fudge in our household. We thank you for your today. Thank you for joining us. It was great to kick off our season with the one and only. Thank you all, and I hope you have a great time listening.